Login accepted.
Hi everyone. My name is Steven, or also Stengo is my online handle. And I'll be talking more on, actually, let me just get rid of this really quick. Talking about student-run cybersecurity clubs, why they matter, and a little bit more than kind of what was promised on digital playgrounds. And you'll find out more about that in the latter half. So first, a little bit of who am I? Obviously, you don't need a picture of me because I'm right here. So instead, I have a picture of my cat. Her name's Honey. Um, and outside of that, I am a third year software engineering PhD student over at UC Irvine, being advised by Associate Professor Dr. Joshua Garcia. And I am broadly interested in research around software engineering, security education, and software security without kind of going too much details into the projects. I was the president of Cyber UCI, the cyber club over at Irvine, for until 2-ish weeks ago. I now just kind of self-proclaim and give myself the title of president emeritus, so I'm still hanging around without all the administrative overhead. Um, and I was president of the club from spring quarter 2024 all the way to, I guess, this quarter, winter quarter 2026. I am the director of academic outreach with the National Upcycle Computing Collective, or otherwise known as NUC. More on that later and who NUC is and why that matters in this case. Um, but let's start with kind of the primer. Why are we talking about this, right? Um, Look at all the supposed job openings. Taking this data from CyberSeek, who did their own study of sorts from May 2024 to April of 2025. There are supposedly 500 over 500,000 cybersecurity job openings in the United States, right? Um, and you may be asking yourself, well, why aren't we getting these jobs? I'm sure many of you are here because you are interested in cybersecurity. You want to do it as a career. You're looking to get into it. You'd think that with 500,000 available openings, you'd be able to find something pretty easily, right? But there's a number of reasons. Not sure which ones of these are more prevalent than the others. But let's go through them, right? There's are a Security itself is highly specialized roles with very specific skill sets that are pretty hard to come by. Like especially if you are in college, a lot of the skills that you need to be successful at cybersecurity aren't really being taught that well. And that brings us to what in academic literature is known as the skills gap, where new graduates are underprepared for what they need to know for on-the-job work in a sense. And obviously, there's a lot of on-the-job training, but it certainly hasn't been enough so that employers are satisfied a lot by the people they are taking from college campuses. And kind of further building on that is we can attribute that to the lack of hands-on experience that students are typically getting. There's people are saying there's too theoretical classes, there's inadequate college curriculum with for cybersecurity and so on. And there's other few other factors nowadays with entry level jobs have been pretty largely slashed just due to AI. Is it actually AI? Who knows? It's probably just more economic downturns and people overhire for COVID, but I digress. And entry level jobs are also being offshore to other regions where, as you know, companies' bottom line is profit. So simply pay someone less so that you yourself can make more money, right? Simple equation there. Um, but when you yourself are thinking about it right now of like, what can I do so that I can get a job, right? Or if you are a faculty or instructor or mentor, how can I help my students or my mentees get jobs, right? Um, and there's only the really top three bullet points are stuff that you can actually control for yourself in a sense. And that being, if they're highly specialized roles, then you simply need to teach that highly special skill set, um, hands-on experience to address the skills gap and such, right? Not much you can do about the whole onslaught of AI, and not much you can do about the offshoring of jobs. And what does this actually look like in school right now? For most computer science degrees or relevant computing majors, whether it's computer engineering, informatics, software engineering, et cetera, there's little to no applied security education in the curriculum. And there's a number of factors for that, right? It's not necessarily school's fault in a sense. Um, there's not enough bandwidth to slot more content into a degree, right? Degrees for CS are very already very intensive. And so to simply add more is basically to just you need to stay longer, you need to take more classes a quarter or semester, and that's not as effective, especially when you are pushing normative times to completion of 4-year degrees or even 3-year degrees into 5, and schools don't really want people to stay that long, especially as they are admitting more and more new students. And security itself is also hard to tackle as a topic in class because you also need to teach first the fundamentals of computer systems, of software engineering before you can talk about system security, software engineering security, and how that works, right? People need to know about the software development lifecycle before they can understand how to implement security in that lifecycle, right? And few schools have professors who are teaching non-introductory security courses in this sense. Many top universities out there, think Georgia Tech, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, even though they're such large schools, their faculty are probably typically teaching just a computer and network security course, a software security course, and reverse engineering binary exploitation course. And that leaves out so much available in the available security space, whether it's penetration testing, cloud security, IT, DevSecOps. There's so much out there to be covered, but yet and because academics are typically teaching stuff that they would know really well, a lot of academics are doing stuff like on the binary exploitation side, and thus they're going to teach that instead. A lot of classes are also locked behind prerequisites. So imagine if someone were to go to, say, I'll take my school, UC Irvine, right? And they want to take all the security courses available. There's not many, but there are some. But they can't really do them before their third and maybe even their last year of school because there's prerequisites most times. They need to take systems programming before they can do it, before they need to take computer networks before they can do it, right? Do they actually need to do that? I don't know. That ultimately depends on the classes, but that's a common model of such. And at R1 universities or highly intensive research universities, so again, think your UCs, think your like the Ivy Leagues, all the professors there that are teaching classes are focused on their research, which means that they don't really care too much about teaching. Many of them are excellent teachers and researchers, but there are a subset, and I'm sure if you've had your experience of where like, man, how is this professor or how is this instructor employed, right? And it's probably because they're just a really excellent researcher or can fund to get money to their school in droves of millions and millions of dollars, and thus they're able to keep their job that way. And maybe they can even buy out of necessarily teaching as well. Other thing is that security classes also paint an incorrect picture of security. So people would often just simply equate cryptography equals security or, password cracking equals security. Both are certainly security, but people then get that wrong idea and simply just think it is just that, right? And they often then just think of like, oh, well, if I were to do security, I'm just going to be setting up routers all day, right? Because that's what they did in the networking class. For some people, if you are in IT, if you are in help desk, that might be a thing. But again, if you're competing in a market where there's other jobs, like, I want to be an AI researcher or I want to be a software engineer, right? Some of those are a lot more visible than security itself. So people often get mistakes. And again, professors often don't have that real world perspective to really motivate people to focus on this. So it's just, don't take it from me, but hear it from some people that I've interviewed as part of one of my research projects. Someone said that their security course was very theory focused. It was 90% lectures and 5% hands-on things. And people come away from that class thinking security is very dry. Security is considered out of scope pretty much all the time. Students are never typing a command in a terminal. And even going as far as my institution is doing a disservice to students by not even exposing security as an option. So how do we actually then go about doing this? Well, the first idea is just improve the college curriculum, provide more resources to help enable this kind of hands-on experimentation. If you were in the earlier section, in the earlier talk today, they thought one of the speakers brought up experiential learning theory, which is certainly the kind of direction to go, especially for a field that is so hands-on like security, where people need that actual hands-on experience to then be able to effectively do it um, in the workplace of sorts. Less theoretical heavy lectures and more on real world applications. Theory is certainly helpful, but too much of it, people then get that wrong idea, and people don't have that much time, especially if you're in a quarter system where classes are only 10 weeks long. You can't kind of flounder that much on just like, hey, let's spend 5 weeks on Alice and Bob learns cryptography, right? um and just more exposure in general that's just kind of weave throughout all the courses is say if you're teaching a course on software engineering, let's also have a unit or a module that focuses on how do we implement security in software engineering, right? But that's a pretty hard ask because you're basically asking professors to go overhaul what they currently have, and they already have, an entirely high pile of stack of work to do instead. But then how do we actually attack this problem? And that leads us to the actual focus of this talk, which is on cybersecurity clubs, right? Many of you are probably here because you are in a club of sorts. Maybe that's how you heard about Tech Symposium. How many of you are in a cybersecurity club or have been in one? So most of you. But there's also a few of you who aren't yet that familiar with one. So just a quick primer on them. These are typically student-run organizations on college campuses, and they focus a lot on just kind of exploring security career in general, a lot of security awareness, education through workshops, participating in a lot of competitions. That's kind of if you think like kind of stuff like hackathons are the competitions in software engineering, you get stuff like Capture the Flags or the Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition, the Collegiate Penetration Testing Competition, or if you're in SoCal, there is the Collegiate Incident Response competition for undergraduate students, or Circus, if you will. That's on digital forensics and IR. All of that are all different competitions that students and security typically have and are the real drivers of actually getting hands-on experience that way. And the other most critical part is community. That's something that often professors won't talk a lot about at all. But yet to get a job, just ask the guy who can give you a job, right? Easier said than done. But if you are attending meetups very often, if you are showing up to a lot and people know you, it's a lot easier to then be like, hey, I just got laid off, and it's really unfortunate. Do you have any leads that you can help provide me with? And you can't do that without knowing people, and that's where the essence of things are. And fortunately, in cybersecurity, at least, there are plenty of opportunities to rely off on, whether if it is a cyber club at your institution or, and we'll go into other communities that are available here. Again, it's just some sample workshops or sample activities that a club handles are, the weekly workshops, guest speakers, resume reviews, if you're more on that side of things, social stuff, open office hours, plenty of things to kind of work off of. The overarching goal of a cyber club is that ultimately people are there because they want jobs in tech, and ideally ones that pay well and are stable, right? And by extension, they want stuff that is to make them marketable, to make them hireable, and to make them AI proof, at least as ideally as possible. And members also, once they're kind of invested in a club, they want to grow that as best as they can. And that may mean convincing people to join, developing more ways for people to get involved, increasing awareness is always, marketing is always a really huge point for these kind of things. And at the very least, have a foundation so that clubs are not just kind of a 1 year type of situation. They pop up, they happen, and then they leave in a few, quarters even. And these are just many of the, rather a few of the clubs that, I've talked with and some others that are more kind of across the United States. I'm not going to spend too much time going through them because that might take me a while. But I'm sure if you've been part of a club, you see your logo here, hopefully. If not, let me know and I'll add it. So, and the question then is why cyber clubs then? That kind of addresses a lot of the problems that I was talking about earlier in the talk, where if you don't have a college curriculum or if your school doesn't have a college curriculum that supports what you want to do, well, it's not a problem for clubs because then it's just a viable path for those who are interested in whatever they want to do to then explore it through a readily available community that's there. And a lot of people often kind of mistake the idea of like, well, if I just show up to a few general meetings, then I'll learn everything I need to get a job, right? Um, but the main core idea is that people kind of need to grasp further onto is that it only really picks up when you kind of you join a competition team or a project research team, whatever that may be. You're hanging around whatever, like if they happen to have a lab space, you're hanging around there more, or you're just really getting to know the members there so that you can like ask for mentoring, you can ask for advice, and this idea of osmosis, where if you're just around the community, there's just a lot of random spontaneous opportunities that pop up that you'd never be exposed to if you were never there in the first place, right? Just being present at times would just lead you to so many doors that you would have never been there if you were just at home hanging out and such. Obviously, have your own alone time, but it's essential to also, if you are on the market, if you are looking for something, you need to kind of be out there and such. And just some examples of this is that at Irvine, we host training for one of the competitions I previously listed. This is for the Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition, one of the more larger blue team oriented events. And this is our turnout this past year. This was one of the more larger conference hall or yeah, conference rooms in our building. And you can see that we were able to pack it. Were we able to maintain those numbers the whole quarter? No, fall off is a really big. But I imagine you've also seen the same a lot. But to kind of start that high and then be able to whittle it down to then be like still having like actively 30, 35 people show up all the way up to the last meeting is still really big because that's 30, 35 more people who were given that blue team training, almost like a course that they never would have gotten if they were just in their courses, right? And again, this is also just another essence of that community aspect of why these cyber clubs have been facilitating entirely without like faculty support or really without much support, and they're able. It's students who are doing this, right? And why we can facilitate this. You want to farm interview stories. Those are really important, right? Especially if as AI is taking all the technical skills away from you, you need stuff to really talk about to make sure that you're still a human, to make sure that you really are impressing people, that you are a leader, that you are a facilitator, that you are a good team player, right? And whether that's through a competition team or whether that's from a project, plenty of ways. If you're a board member, you get leadership experience. If you are even just a member itself, you get that teamwork soft skill that, again, many classes don't have. Some of you may be familiar with the concept of capstone courses or capstone projects, where you actually do get to work on a team and be able to execute out a whole project. But again, those are rare and far few in between, and typically reserved for students who are about to graduate, right? And don't underestimate the value of stuff that are even unique to cyber clubs. If you're running Tech Symposium, that's a big event, right? If some of you are maybe familiar with the OSS Con that happened back in October, running those kind of conferences, basically taking the idea of bigger ones like Scale or DEF CON and bringing them to your own local institution is a really big deal. And only stuff like that can, are happening because you are in this unique environment of sorts. And participating in a competition that's kind of nationally recognized. Hackathons are obviously very much recognized, but they typically are kind of once a year held by different schools versus something like CCDC or CPTC that are across the entire nation, or if you're CPTC, across the globe. And those have their those own unique distinctions as well. And back on the idea of space and community, shouting out, I mean, that's obviously the DEF CON logo up there, but also focus on our Irvine Underground, very much local to the space around here. Um, those are, like I was saying earlier, of that, something unique to Southern California is that we happen to have a really, really large open space of security professionals, but really also hackers or people who are very much in the idea of, like not actually like hacking into the things, but people who just want to do cool stuff with things that they shouldn't be done, taking the idea of computer systems and making it do something it shouldn't, right? In a very abstract fashion. Um, and some of those are incredibly very thriving with not only professionals, but also many students attending that. So there's even if you're still very early on as a freshman in college, you can still come by and still get a lot because you can just ask the other college students there, be like, hey, what's your experience with this? Where are you at your learning? Do you have any advice for me? And so on, right? And at some point, and again, similar to the idea of showing up consistently and getting involved in a cyber club, these communities also have different pathways to get involved so that you're not just like a typical participant. You can come by and actually get involved, and that's how you really grow your presence and impact there, right? And many one other thing to mention from this is that, like, if say you want to go to conferences like DEF CON, right, but you don't have the funds for it, you're a broke college student, I'm there, grad students get paid pennies. But for being a part of these conferences, a lot of people also go to there, and oftentimes as panelists, as booths, and they often need volunteers, right? And from, like I was saying earlier, from being in the room and being present to find out about these opportunities, you can just magically go to DEF CON for free because you then have suddenly agreed to volunteer for something, right? And many of these people actually do need volunteers. They just don't have the people who they trust and rely on, right? But these cyber clubs, I wouldn't be here if there weren't so many challenges with them. Some of them that are really kind of at the pain points of a club is that what I call the revolving door problem. There's every year there's a constant rotation of leadership, and there's no sense of stability that are the ones who are passing down knowledge from one to the other that way. If you're in a company, you probably have a pretty good grasp, in a sense, on knowledge transfer, on succession planning, but students aren't actively thinking about that. Students are more concerned about what am I going to get on my finals so that I can pass the class and graduate. Or how am I going to do on this lead code interview so I can get the job? And because of that, this problem of leadership where there might be one year where the club is doing super, super hot, and the next year the club just magically falls over. And this can happen to anyone, right? I'm concerned about it at my own club, right? That can happen to anyone. And is no really solution to this because it's not like we can just ask people like, hey, can you stay a little longer? Because they're forced to leave. And two, we can't pay them better than Meta or Google or whoever that they're going to work for, right? Faculty and staff support, you'd think, are the ones to provide that support. But like I was saying earlier, at R1 institutions, professors are more focused on research. They're more focusing on attending to their PhD students, who, again, from my own experience, don't get that much attention either. And even if you are at another type of university, even then, those faculty still have other obligations that make it a lot harder for them to be involved in the day-to-day of a club, right? And like I was saying earlier, security is scary. That little meme out there, hackers kind of, are portrayed not very well in media. But then again, if hackers were portrayed accurately, it would also be very boring. So it's a tough problem and conundrum to be in of sorts. And developing content for security education is actually quite hard, especially if you're a student. There's really a lot of interesting, cool things out there, right? Like I just, like say someone just found like the latest Chrome exploit, right? But how do you actually teach someone and convey the coolness of that, right? Without going into like, oh well, okay, so here's this idea of a V8 engine, right? But you can't start with that right away because people are still struggling to understand of like well, what the hell is a browser in the first place to then get to that part, right? And lack of funding and resources is a big one. My club in last year we got $1,800 to operate with the whole year. For context, that's not that much to work with, and especially if we're blowing it on stickers and pizza, doesn't leave us too much room to actually get like say a whole computing infrastructure. But let's some of these challenges are a lot harder to deal with. And so let's instead just focus on these two problems for now that clubs deal with, which is the difficulty of developing engaging content and lack of funding and resources. But more specifically, resources. But what do I mean by resources in this case? Some of the essentials for this is that this might include having Amazon tokens so that people can spin up virtual machines. Everyone does have their own laptops, but there's certainly not enough to then drive like an entire, say, I want a whole mock network infrastructure so that I can run a blue teaming and red teaming exercises, right? Usually you would need to resort to actual cloud compute, and that might include a bunch of EC2 VMs, and then you need a storage for it and so on. And that costs money, right? And like I said earlier, if you're getting paid negative to go to college, there's not much money to work with. There's many platforms out there like Hack the Box or Try Hack Me that are awesome resources for security education and even go through the effort already of gamifying it so that it's engaging. But as I've said earlier, if say you want to provide like the premium licenses for everyone, right? That's $10 a month for each head that you want to have that license for. And again, if say you wanted to help teach use Hack the Box or training for CPTC for 30 students, right? A month. That's $300 a month. And if training goes on for 2 months, that's 600. That's a third of my budget already, right? And if you might want to buy Cisco equipment because Cisco is big or something. And you want to have people to get hands-on experience with, say, setting up a Cisco switch or a Cisco AP, right? Or an access point. And again, that costs money, that are the precious resources that we don't have. But ideally, if resource and funding wasn't a problem, you could then have like a 24/7 available exercises. You would have custom machines for blue and red teaming exercises. You get hands-on experience with actual vendor gear. And this idea of a student-run digital playground, which I'll kind of go into a little bit further. But I just said a few slides ago that clubs don't have that much money. And the whole idea of what I want to advocate for is the idea of scale. And how do we allow and enable more types of education across any higher education institution, whether you are a community college, whether you are a primarily undergraduate focused institution, or you are an R1 university. And I come at this from an angle where if you look at the top schools for the different cyber competitions that I've mentioned, it's always the same schools over and over and over again. If you are in the CCDC circuit, it's always Stanford University. It's always Guilty, UC Irvine. It's and also Cal Poly Pomona is also very up there for both CCDC and CPTC. And it doesn't leave that much room for other schools to break into simply because they have limited resources to work with. They don't have the same infrastructure that, say, other schools have. If you are in that CCDC circuit, if you notice, the same schools that qualified for the top 8 regionals are the same exact schools from last year. And so it goes to show that it is a small community, but yet we want other schools to break into this environment. Like we don't always want the same people from the same universities being successful. And obviously, it's we want a competitive environment that continues to push one another along, right? If you're an esports fan, if you think about different regions that are not as good, right? Like say in League of Legends, right? Europe is not a great region because they don't have that much competition. That's the reality. But Korea is a great region because they have so many teams to push one another forward. And so we want to have that same level of competition in a sense. And if you're more, on the side of like kind of international overview of things, you want people from the US to really come out top and all that jazz, right? So And I had to put some cat memes in there because there's some cat themed CTFs, I believe. Go check them out afterwards. But if with a limited budget, uh, you don't have that much money to really do this left half of things, right? But what if you don't need those resources, right? So think about that for a minute. So then, if you don't have these, what can you do in a sense? Hmm? Fraud, yes. If you can hack into your Wells Fargo interface and then you change the number, you might get away with it. So exactly. If you don't get caught, you'll be fine. Um, but what if it was free, right? Kind of think about that for a second there. What does that mean, and what does that look like? Um, and totally not biased here, but here to present about the National Upcycle Computing Collective, or NUC, that I was mentioning earlier. But NUC is a SoCal-based nonprofit that we upcycle computing equipment and hardware. Typically, that comes in the form of people throwing out equipment because they don't need it anymore, or it's just too old, or it's a lot of companies that would do their yearly IT refresh, and then just kind of rather than going to e-waste, why not we take that equipment and we use it for other purposes? Just essentially think recycling, but kind of using that equipment back and then putting it into a better uses, or upcycled, if you will. Um, and this kind of whole initiative was started back in 2022 when they were unfortunately roped into security education by supporting Irvine with this kind of whole story there. Ask people in the back about it. But this picture here is a example of kind of this is our on-premise data center we have at Irvine. Again, if you were at the earlier talk today on student-run infrastructure at Cal Poly Pomona, it's certainly not as this isn't as grand as what they have, right? This is in the corner of a lab space, with He-Man showing on one of the monitors there. But the kind of magic and the essence of this is that it's all student run and entirely outside of like any administrative overhead, outside of any faculty support. And sometimes that does lead us into the what is it? The gray area of ask for forgiveness, not permission. But we'll go over that and how that kind of looks out in a little bit. And another thing that we really advocate for is the idea of unstructured tinker time. And what do I mean by this? Well, your school assignments are very, very specific. If you are in a computing major, I'm sure you're very familiar with being given assignment specifications, and then you're told exactly what to do. Implement this function, write these test cases, make sure the function can do this, make sure you get this output. And that's on purpose in a sense. Um, People need to grade easily. Like if as a TA myself, if I have to grade 80 students in a week for their coding assignments, I kind of want it to be easy. I kind of want it to be even automated, right? So there's not you need guardrails on this in a sense for a course environment so that it's fair. People can't come back to you with like, hey, you marked me incorrectly. Please change my grade into that, right? But yet this kind of model of very specific like kind of grading and even being told like, hey, implement this again, that doesn't really translate well to the real world. And people then are then being thrown into the real world with this kind of gap where they have to navigate this kind of challenge of like, well, going from the idea of very specifically doing this to then having a much more open environment of figuring out what can I do as part of my work in a sense. Especially if you're a security researcher, you're often left to fend for the wolves and just have to go about and finding out your own direction of sorts. Um, but cyber clubs, and especially if you were to say be given a bunch of equipment to play around with, allows for this more open-ended skills development, in a sense where again you are tinkering around in an unstructured fashion. Where if say you were just given a router and just be like mess around with it, go on, and you're told nothing else on what to do. Obviously, it's not always that case. Sometimes it is like, hey, here's this firewall, go put it in our server infrastructure. That itself is like certainly a lot less unbounded and unstructured, but and also significantly harder for a lot of students because some of them are expecting that little hand-holdy instruction that they are getting from their classes. And so this kind of environment, whether it is a cyber club and with this equipment, you're able to start breaking those barriers down. And so they're that much more one step further for be ready for the real world, right? And here's are just some of the clubs that we have, Nuck has given equipment to and work a lot closely with. And some, going from top left to bottom right, so, Cyber UCI's logo, then we have UC Davis, then we have Layer 8 at CSUN, then we have the Offensive Security Society at CSU Fullerton, then we have CSU Long Beach, Slug Security over at UC Santa Cruz, CSU Los Angeles Claw Command, CSU San Bernardino's CISO, that's and then Cyber UCR. And again, we also talk a lot with we talk a lot with other groups such as even we've talked with Swift, we've talked with ACM at UCLA, or rather their cyber division there. And so there's a lot out there. Just these are the ones we've actually given equipment to and at least work somewhat more closely with. And so I talk about the idea of a student-run digital playground earlier, right? And where does this differentiate itself a little bit more from, say, the student-run infrastructure that Cal Pomona, was talking about a little earlier. And this idea here is that without any kind of administrative oversight or without any kind of faculty to guide them, the students in these cyber clubs are the ones driving their own on-premise data center so that they have this experimental digital playground to work with for their own needs and wants. And it's almost like as if you have a more accessible shared home lab, and you get hands-on experience with the hardware itself. There's been, this story has been told a few times of where when you plop like this server in front of a student, they're actually just marvel at the idea of like, what is this? And can I see the inside of it, right? Maybe for a good reason of that when you are typically working with, say, like, hey, I'm just going to work with like, like a microarchitecture, service, or like just working with cloud in your workplace, just work with AWS, you're protected in a sense of having to deal with all that messy hands-on or that people would have to do in like a data center, right? But if you're a student, that at least doesn't help you that much, because if you are really want to be this kind of well-rounded individual to kind of really understand exactly what everything is going on, you want to try to have this exposure so that you can actually understand and really connect things from dot to dot in a sense. And like I mentioned earlier, rather than using a bunch of AWS tokens or setting up personal devices to do so, just use this club infrastructure so that you can spin up virtual machines, and that way you can have entire networks for blue and red teaming purposes. And one other interesting aspect of this that we've kind of observed is that these clubs that we've worked with that have started to form their own infrastructure teams. And the idea that what has happened is that they now have informal service level agreements with their team, or like their users, if you will. And these users are actually just other, like, say, the CCDC team of the club. CCDC team needs to use this infra because they are heavily practicing for CCDC regionals. But yet infrastructure wants to then take down the server so that they can make upgrades or that they can install new equipment. Well, CCDC isn't happy with that because they were wanted to use it on Saturday so that they can run their own mock competition. And this actually emulates this environment where if you are in a company, you are probably very, very familiar with what an SLA is. But yet students would never be exposed to the idea of an SLA in a class. But now they're suddenly forced with the idea of like, wait, okay, so I have to prep for this midterm on Sunday, and I have a project due on Friday. So realistically, I can only install this equipment in my infra on Saturday. But wait, I can't do that because the team needs it for practice. So you're what are you supposed to do in the situation, right? So it's this interesting odd where like this cyber club is now operating as if they are an actual company and getting this experience for the better and for the worse in a sense. So just to showcase a little bit of our server infrastructure here, again, very, very messy because these are all very much done by students and also with the support of a lot of alumni and mentors who are very much know how to rack and stack a server. But yeah, you can see it's a lot of different kind of servers and storage and all that. And again, we just like to have fun here. That's one of our club members' face being displayed on the digital display there. Um, and another kind of look into this without going into the details of the actual implementation because I'm short on time. The This is our kind of Proxmox interface that's hosted on the server infrastructure, and you can see there's like kind of all this little like pods going on where like different machines for different uses, whether it's for CPTC purposes, whether for CCDC and so on, or even for personal use and research as well. One use case for this is that for our cyber defense competition team's preparation last year, we would not have been able to do as successful as we did last year without the help of NUC and the infrastructure. And what we did do is that using that infrastructure, we set up 8 networks to play around on. And this was a total of 104 different machines, 84 injects. If you're familiar with CCDC, that's an ungodlike amount of injects. And also, again, 8 networks means that we had 8 different environments to mess around with, try to practice our playbooks on, to practice our tooling with, and so on, and test it very heavily. This is from one of the papers that was have been under review for an academic conference. But there's other benefits that this kind of brings, whether it's bringing more exposure to your club, whether it's more kinds of hands-on activities. Like I was saying, it's like a virtual playground. And clubs are able to grow with this kind of environment because they have something to facilitate with. And as many say, proof is in the pudding. And I kind of selected a wide overview of what we kind of have been able to do with indirectly and directly. For example, this year our penetration testing team was able to take first at globals, and they were able to do that because they set up a bunch of the old CPTC environments, and then they just like practice on like different years of it, and we're able to like, hey, I think we feel pretty good. We were able to find all the vulnerabilities, at least based on the like previously um, reports and so on. The second picture in the middle is our current CCDC team. And I really like this because it showcases that community where after like, 2 to 3 hours of doing like a practice session, they just go out, hang out, and get dinner, right? And it really emulates that sports environment where it's like, it's a team all working towards the same goal. And then afterwards, let's just hang out, grab some food, right? And then the other one is a display with all anyways, with our table at one of kind of the outreach events we did for our campus, where we kind of took all our trophies, put them out on display, and that's how we were able to drive membership recruitment by having a lot of these on display. Some of it due to kind of our competition success, and more of like an indirect benefit of having not only the cyber club but also having infrastructure to work with. And so just to kind of wrap this up, I think it's just automatic at this point. But so how do I get this from my school and club, right? It's a very informal process. I just really want to iterate that because it's still very much such a very small team that's very much stretched out. We're running this kind of novel educational collaboration model that has never been tried before. And we don't know what we're doing. We're just kind of going by every day and every week. But if people when clubs are interested, what usually happens is that they talk with NUC sometimes in person at IBU or Stage Thunder or in the back. You then find alignment with available equipment, whatever Snuck has in storage. We see what existing expertise you may have, make an implementation plan, so on. And this isn't because I didn't finish my slides 10 minutes before this. It's genuinely because there's so much that goes on in between that I don't know how to really characterize this so far. And again, that's really to highlight the informal process of this and how different this is from the typical cyber ranges that a club or that a school may have. I know, RIT has a cyber range, right? They're $1 million cyber range, but is that being run by students? How is that operating? Like, is there a lot of red tape to be able to do stuff with it? I imagine there is. But with this, we're on more of a, again, ask for forgiveness, not for permission model. But it's not always easy sailing with this. And again, kind of taking from one of the figures I have in my paper, we have a lot of challenges that we face. Um, and and this kind of includes administration and working with kind of school administration, being able to get permission to be able to like kind of bring equipment on. And some of them are really stringent about that. They're always asking and more so on the IT side of like, oh, where's this equipment coming from? Or, oh, why are you giving us this free equipment? What are you doing? Is this like, do you have like a malicious intent or something? Which is a kind of a fair assumption. If students were suddenly given a gift of, say, $100,000 worth of equipment, um, why are they just getting it for free? But they don't fully understand the context, and there's a lot of kind of we can done there to kind of break down these barriers. But there's always other challenges, like we still need funding to some extent, so that there's still some equipment that we can't fully upcycle from. RAM is a big one nowadays. It'd be great if we could get RAM from by just shaking a few trees. But nowadays it's very, very costly, if you will. Thanks AI again. Um, but the nice thing at least is that from our model here, what we've talked about, there's a lot of ways forward. And this includes so again, some of the challenges that I've talked about, but what does this look like as the ultimate vision? Um, is this going to turn into like this interconnected network of cyber clubs that each have their own kind of digital playground, like that each specialize in something? One school focuses a lot on red teaming, one school focuses a lot on blue teaming, one's actually like working with the hardware and such and so on. Um, is this a novel model of playgrounds that then actually gets implemented into higher education? Is this a bunch of experimental zones to be turned into that then where it just creates a bunch of security AI agents, then they can just test around on them, right? Um, and or is this an opportunity for cyber clubs to have a stronger presence on security education at their respective institutions? Maybe all four, maybe none of them, who knows? So, but yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Hope you were able to learn something from it, or you at least learn something cool at least. Um, but yeah, reach out. Again, by trade, I am a researcher, so always kind of looking to get new ideas, willing to work with more people for things. Also doing academic outreach with NUC. I am kind of the front line, if you will, that handles the administrative overhead of sorts when talking to people. And then after that, you get to the big dogs that actually know what they're doing with the equipment. But that's you have to get through me first, I guess, is how it works. But or you can also reach out on Discord, Stango there. But yeah, you're happy to talk thoughts, happy to exchange ideas. But yeah, again, thanks for listening in. And yeah. Cool. Anyone have any questions, anything like that? Yeah.
Is the aspect that is a playground for students to use to do things, but also comparing that to the average cost of building your own home lab, which for some people is also a barrier because
Yeah.
there's a cost there, and now with price of any components or hardware going up, it's even more of a barrier.
Yeah.
So uh, considering that average price to being able to have the resources of for example, the stuff from NUT or from your school, versus having to build it yourself and then be able to collaborate with your classmates is another aspect there that is very important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the idea is that not only you're not building it for yourself, but rather it's built for not only the current set of students, but also for the next set of students. Um, Maybe the next set of students might also fuck it up. That's also a big possibility. They might configure something and it just blows up the entire environment. But that's kind of the charm of this, of where because there's no such overhead that can happen. And usually we have some, mentors, some people in NUC to help make sure that doesn't happen. But the nice thing, at least, is that this allows for equipment to you can freely burn it down and build it back up. Um, and and again, that's only possible because this is equipment that isn't new, that isn't like, hey, if you break it, it's very, very expensive. Don't do that. And you're not like worried about wasting money in a sense. This is all equipment that, if anything, needs to be used before it becomes like fully end of life, right? Or before it can no longer be used. We're really just extracting maximum value, and giving hardware new life. Otherwise, it would just end up in a landfill. So, um, but yeah, if there's no other questions, if you are interested in kind of, how you'd be involved, or whatever, just, happy to chat. So, yeah, that's basically. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think and I'll put it in the context of this a little bit, of that before I imagine the skills we would be thinking about teaching would be largely the same, of like, we just focus on people making sure they get experience with like DevOps, people are getting experience with like setting up and like a server, being able to like use different tools so that they can like run a red teaming exercise on like a mock network, right? But that changes, AI changes the game a little bit, because now it's like, well, we have decently good agentic AI that can do, say, like a, initial reconnaissance on a network, right? So then how do we kind of adapt how we teach things and how things are being done, so that, students are getting maximum value? Because if we're still thinking about the idea, and whether you are or against AI, it's a kind of its own little kind of can of worms in a sense. But if the reality is that AI is here to stay. And so if you are on the educator side, if you are on the side of like, I want to make sure that people that I help teach and mentor will get jobs in probably a very scarce market, then we have to think about how do we actually then propel these our students and mentees to then be set up for this. And many of the students, like I mentioned from here already, is like, they're all like very much at the top, and many of these are very succeeding really well and getting job placements even in this kind of scarce market, because even if we're not yet focused on delivering like AI education, we are at least building up a lot of soft skills. So like, even like I mentioned earlier, about how do you manage like this service level agreement between teams, and it requires a lot of communication, a lot of just simply like work, like kind of making compromises to one another, that again you don't get in the classrooms. And so if AI is slowly taking away a lot of our technical abilities, then a cyber club itself is a perfect way to develop your soft skills. And you still have this little range that you can get actual hands-on experience. Say like, if you need to learn how to use agentic AI really well, then let's give you a real environment to actually use it on. And yeah, there'll be less, I guess. And again, nothing that we can do, and that's kind of what sucks the most, is that is we as a club or as a student or even as what we can do here, we can't really do much, because I think that's just like, companies and how they are operating. And so and how I kind of have view things, so I'm not always too much in the doom and gloom, is just to really think about, of like, then how do we actually prepare students to be prepared for this really scarce market? So yeah, hopefully that answers a little bit of that your question there.
You know, like the answer some of the professors gave them, oh yeah, yeah, probably next year. I'm like, okay, good to know. I'm not gonna be around anymore.
Yeah. And I definitely agree with the sentiment because like, you know, if there are like the curriculum isn't going to catch up for many, many years, then it's these clubs that are really the ones who have this chance to step up to then fill that gap. And again, that's what we do already with security of like, we're not teaching in security clubs about, like cryptography that we might be, but it's like in a much different context so that people get that hands-on. And again, AI has hit us so hard and fast that we haven't yet, you know, implemented a lot of this. But hopefully, as we progress, AI will be implemented into clubs so that they can be teaching. If someone like you was in, still in school and such, they would be able to go to a club and be able to get that hands-on experience with the tool so that they're not lagging behind.
That's the benefit of osmosis as well. Go talk to people who are in the industry right now, what they've seen, what are they doing?
Yeah.
What does that look like right now?
Yeah. And so it's very much, in this kind of dire situation, we only have ourselves to rely on. Well, again, I'm happy to talk about it with anyone here more about it outside. But I'm gonna pass it over to Dylan, who I know is the next speaker slot. So I'm gonna pass it over to him.